Thank you. Can you hear me? All right, good. So I'm going to talk about the laboratory's environmental stewardship and sustainability plan. Some of you may have heard that the plan is a 50-year plan. I'll frame that in a moment. But I want to share a little bit about my background and how I've come to be in this place at this time. I've studied environmental health, environmental science, and public health since my undergraduate time at Rutgers in New Jersey. I have a doctorate in public health. I'm a public health scientist, and I've been with the laboratory for the majority of my professional career. And what I bring to this position, I'm the Associate Director for Environment, Safety, and Health at the laboratory, is a deep experience in public health research, starting in occupational exposure assessments of synthetic fuels industry in the 80s, as well as a variety of management positions at the laboratory. And the other thing that is important for you to know about me is that the way that I became interested in environmental issues has to do with where I grew up. I grew up in New Jersey, in an area at the time in the 1970s, where I lived was known as Cancer Alley. So if you grow up in an environment like that, that gets your attention, would tend to get your attention if you're an aware person. And at that time, we also still experienced air pollution alerts where sports activities and outdoor activities were curtailed as a result of air pollution problems. And so all of that influenced me as a young person to, I wasn't quite sure how to characterize what I was interested in, although I liked the sciences, and I ultimately discovered what was then known as pollution science or environmental science, and then my career has developed since then. And so my doctoral work at the University of Michigan was in environmental and occupational health with a focus on, frankly, the financial aspects of making good decisions, responsible decisions to protect human health and the environment. And so the link with what we're going to discuss this afternoon is that the long-term environmental stewardship strategy for the laboratory is based on good decision-making, using research and facts to make decisions, as well as collecting input from a variety of audiences so we can better understand where the concerns are and understand the needs. And the last point that I'd like to make is that as we know, New Mexico is a beautiful state. We've got clean air, beautiful skies, and I live here. I've raised my family here, and so protecting the environment and certainly the health of the public is very important to me, as it is important to, I would suspect, each of you, because we live here, we have our families here, our lives are here. So that's essential that you understand that about me. And so let's see if I can figure out how to do this. And so we'll be talking about this long-term strategy. But so as I go through this, I would encourage you to ask questions, because there's nothing worse than death by PowerPoint. So if you have a question, if something doesn't make sense, please raise your hand or just ask the question, and then we can have a dialogue, because I'd like to make this a two-way street, if at all possible. So the purpose behind our plan is to be able to understand the changes that may be happening in the environment, plans at the laboratory for future mission, looking at our legacy contamination, looking at the present, and then planning for the future. And so to do all of that, it's important to understand that, so we're focusing on cleaning up the past. I think many of you know that we have many projects that are engaged in environmental restoration and decontamination and decommissioning of certain laboratory facilities, the most notable of which was TA-21 in Los Alamos last year. We've completed that project. So that's cleaning up the past. You tie cleaning up the past with controlling the present. In my directorate, we have in the Environment, Safety, and Health Directorate, we have more than 500 employees and contractors who work every day to not just help us comply, because compliance is a 20th century notion. To me, compliance is to be expected. That's what we get to open up the door. But at the laboratory, our goal is to be a high-performing organization in all aspects of our mission, but with respect to environment, safety, and health, we want to operate with excellence, which means that we anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control potential hazards, not only in the workplace, but any of those potential contaminants that could enter the environment and therefore affect public health or create environmental insults. Transparency, which is the other component, this is an example of transparency. Having a conversation with all of you to describe what we're doing, and what makes it a conversation is that you do have questions, ask them. But it's important for us to describe what we're doing at the laboratory and hear from the public and answer your questions and concerns. And so we'll talk a bit more about that in this presentation. And the overall goal, Kevin Smith, who is the previous site manager, and I'm smiling while I say this because I had this conversation with Kevin actually many times. And I did ask him if he was offended by the following. I said, Kevin, what I find somewhat ironic is that a former fighter pilot is encouraging me to do more in my job. And in my organization, we have environmental health scientists, we have industrial hygienists, engineers, public health scientists. This is our profession. And I was having someone from outside of our discipline saying, gee, don't you think you can actually do more? And in a moment, I'll talk about the level of commitment that we have, not only from my boss, Charlie McMillan, the laboratory director, but the support we have from the Los Alamos site office. And so with this, there's part of our purpose is to demonstrate that we're protecting the public health, the environment, using this long-term strategy. Now, just talking about it, you can say, well, this is just a PowerPoint presentation. What are you doing to make it real? Well, as we go through the presentation this afternoon, I'm going to give you some examples. But then all of you, I think there are these booklets in the back, and this describes in some detail what we're doing with respect to our long-term strategy. And one of the most important things that we're doing is we're making available, we have made available to the public more than 11 million data records that are available through the Intellis website that documents the results of our environmental sampling for air, water, groundwater, surface water, foodstuffs, biota, and so on, for the public to examine and to use and perform their own analyses if they're so predisposed, to be able to make some decisions and ask questions of us about what we're doing and why. Also, it's important for all of you to recognize that the way that we make the long-term strategy meaningful is that we have an ISO 14001 certified environmental management system. So, okay, so that sounds like regulatory jargon. What is it? Our environmental management system is the way in which we engage senior executives, people at my level and my bosses, with employees and other managers to identify the potential risks at the laboratory, look for ways to mitigate those risks by developing corrective action plans. So we identify a problem, we identify a solution, we identify an owner for that solution, and we track those, we fund the work, and then we track those solutions to closure. So it's a way for us, it's the Shewhart cycle. Plan, do, check, act. It's a process, circular process of continuous improvement. So when you see the Certified Environmental Management System, when you hear EMS, all that is just a framework in which we conduct our business. We meet on a quarterly basis, we fund the work, and we hold ourselves accountable. We measure and track our performance to determine, to be certain that the actions that we're implementing are in fact driving the kind of of improvement that is important for us to see that we're making good investments in protecting public health and the environment. So why do we do all of this? I'm also, as a laboratory, I'm a citizen laboratory. I'm a public health scientist, but we're there for a specific national security mission. All of this, the environmental stewardship strategy, is designed to also help us complete our mission compliantly and safely. And so it's not just the environmental people working together to solve the problem, it's all of us, because when I talk about the framework and the strategy, you'll see that it's the laboratory coming together to solve problems facing the laboratory as one institution. We have one mission for one institution. So it's not just the environmental guys, well, you guys go do that. No, it's all of us working together to effectively solve these problems. And we've got problems, and we're working toward alleviating those. So I mentioned earlier that this idea originated with Kevin Smith. He initially called it a 50-year plan. We had initially had struggled with, so how do we frame a 50-year plan? When Kevin first talked to us about this, we thought, okay, let's pretend we're back in 1962 when JFK visited Los Alamos and forecast what the laboratory would look like 50 years from now. I see some smiles around the room. You can imagine that we all thought, well, not quite sure where Kevin's going with this, but we'll take some direction and we'll try to sort this out. Kevin's basic message was this. I had an epiphany one day. So I'm a public health scientist, and it occurred to me, Kevin's saying, I want you to do more. I want you to take control of your destiny from an environmental protection perspective by anticipating what the potential hazards are and resolving those. And he's saying, you have our support. I've got the laboratory director's support, and I have worked in industry. And in some of the other organizations where I've worked, the kind of work that I do as a professional is considered a cost. It's considered support. It's considered we need to do it. It's not really evaluated. It's not part of the mission. What we have, and the support that I have from now Juan Griego and my lab director, is that they're saying this is important. We are going to operate efficiently, compliantly, and we're not going to negatively affect the environment or public health. So what exactly is the strategy? and so the bottom line behind this is, as the laboratory senior official for environment and safety and public health, is that we integrate various pieces of information and data, and we use that to make decisions. And so we make decisions and so there are three time frames that we're looking at. We look at the past, so we're cleaning up the legacy waste as a result of practices from the Manhattan Project in the early 50s. My responsibility as the Associate Director for Environment, Safety, and Health is that we're focusing on today as well as tomorrow and the past. But in terms of today, our goal is to operate with excellence, which means we anticipate potential hazards and eliminate those before they can become problems. That's what Kevin Smith was encouraging us to do, is to take control of our destiny by identifying potential areas of a problem, potential problem areas, and either engineering or designing those out of the system such that they don't become a big issue. And then by doing so, we're in an environment right now, and I've got a couple of here's an example of how we use research. So at the laboratory, we do other research. As you know, it seems like the climate change, regardless of your political persuasion, the climate is changing. That's just a fact. We can talk about what's contributing to it, but the point that I want to make is that here in this region in the Southwest, I would say that we're ground zero for changes in the climate in the U.S. Southwest. We are seeing changes. We're at least 5, possibly 10 years ahead of some of the changes that are occurring elsewhere. And so recently, what we do is we take research that occurs at the laboratory and with some of our partners, and we translate that research into practical solutions for decision making. So I'll give you an example. Recently in the prestigious journal Nature, scientists at the laboratory, the USGS, and other local scientists wrote a paper about temperature as a potent driver of regional forests, drought stress, and tree mortality. So, okay, so what does that mean? These findings are important to us because we'll use these results to plan and make informed forest management decisions. Basically, what it's saying is as the temperatures increase, that we're going to have, and the impact on our local climate will be tree mortality. So that effectively the trees are going to, ponderosa pine, pinon, are going to be retreating to a higher elevation. And in some cases, ponderosa pine, juniper may at some lower elevation cease to exist. Ponderosa pine can still exist at a higher elevation. But what this is predicting is the impact on climate. So we're using information like this to help make decisions. So what would be an important decision? Well, if we lose the tree cover on the lower elevations on laboratory property on our mesas, we know we have about 2,000 archaeologic sites spread throughout the laboratory. We also have spotted owl habitat. So there would be a direct impact on the spotted owl. So we'd have to take that information and use that in our calculus of making decisions. But also, we'd have to implement some protective measures to ensure that we're not going to lose those important cultural resources for the some 2,000 archaeologic sites on the laboratory property. So that's important. There's also recently, with some of the wildlife biologists who work for me, wrote 2 papers on spotted owl habitat. One of the papers resulted in developing a model to accurately define spotted owl habitat, and those results will help us make good stewardship decisions, because right now we have very large swaths of the laboratory identified as potential spotted owl habitat. This helps us refine those areas. Yes?
What is your source of funding, and how is it different from funding cleanup or funding research for other reasons?
Okay.
What is your source of funding?
So the source of funding for my organization is from laboratory. Basically, it's a laboratory overhead account. It's called the Site Support Services account, and that, so money comes into the laboratory from either defense programs, work for others, because we do everything from biologic research, as well as weapons stewardship and materials research and everything in between. So as money comes in from various federal sources, there's a tax on that money, and a portion of that money is then used to operate the laboratory. Everything from occupational medicine to accounting to human resources and my organization. So the work that's, especially the spotted owl work, what I've encouraged my scientists to do is for a while we stopped publishing our results. We do scientific work to help protect our cultural biologic resources. And what I've encouraged my scientists to do is, when I first came in the laboratory, we published a lot. I said, you're doing work. I've incentivized them to, in their performance appraisals, to publish their findings. And so we're using laboratory dollars as part of our normal activities, and I've asked them to take the time to produce publications to share the results with the public, but also then it helps us work across the laboratory with other scientific communities. Did that answer your question, Bob? Okay, so I have a question for you. So this may seem fairly straightforward. Would you expect that spotted owls would be affected more by explosions related to our firing sites or by recreational activities that occur either on the laboratory property or in Bandelier National Monument? Excuse me?
Recreational activities.
Okay, that's one vote for recreational activities. Any other thoughts? Either explosion. So, at least intuitively, when I talked with this biologist, I said, well, of course, it should be the the explosions from the firing sites because the impact is greater. What we were able to discover in our research was that it was recreational activity. And some of the reasons for that is that the spotted owls somehow found they adapted to the intermittency of the explosions as opposed to the ongoing nature of the recreational activities. It's completely counterintuitive, but this is an example of how within our long-term strategy we need to be able to we take data and information that we collect and use that to help support our decision making. So part of implementation of the strategy is open communications. So again, this is part of but this isn't the only place where we're communicating. We're going to schools, we're talking to communities, we're sharing this within the laboratory. We want the community to understand that we're doing everything we can. We're doing our best to be good stewards of the environment and protecting the health of the public. And we welcome feedback. The overarching strategies, as I gave as an example, here's how we use research to be able to help us make inform our decisions, because we want to make fact-based and data-based decisions. But it's not just facts and data. It's also integrating some of the intangibles that can help inform our judgment. And we have, I'll discuss briefly some software applications, and this is very important to me. It's not just compliance. I spent the last couple of days in evaluating potential managers, and there was a scenario about safety, and people talk about, well, we need to be compliant. It's really not about compliance. Compliance is an entry ticket. That is to be assumed. It's more than compliance. If we want to be a high-performing organization at Los Alamos, it's got to be about caring for one another at work, being certain that we're good neighbors, of protecting the health of the public. So, and that's beyond compliance. And so that's an important value that I have. Now, in terms of a framework for the environmental strategy, there's 4 pieces. There's input, there's integration, there's implementation, and then there's transparent communications. This top layer of boxes simply represents the fact that we take input, whether it's from federal government, Congress, our employees, the public, and we use that to help begin to formulate our targets for priorities and decision making. But then we combine that by integrating with long-term development, site sustainability, and our strategy. The heart of our planning at the laboratory the focus is to be this long-term environmental strategy, and it works in this way. The laboratory, if you recall when I said that, how could we forecast from 1962, 50 years out, to anticipate potential impacts? Well, that's a tremendous challenge. So what we're trying to do is work with the laboratory programs, the science programs, and understand what their future mission targets might be. What will the lab look like in the future? What missions are we going to attract to the laboratory? Well, we need to take what we call programmatic strategic planning and integrate that into our long-term environmental strategy, and then look at it in these ways. If you're going to bring in, let's just say that we want to have 10 new supercomputers, and the impact would be that maybe we need to build new facilities to support it, but then from a site sustainability perspective, do we have enough electricity? Do we have enough water to cool those computers? So part of what we're trying to do is really, for the first time, begin to think across the laboratory. It's not just my problem. This is a challenge. It's a technical challenge for the entire laboratory, for us to talk to one another across organizational boundaries, to think about doing what's best for the community and what's best for the laboratory, and therefore what's best for national security, because that's what we do, is we solve national security problems. And then the way that we implement, again, is through the heart of this is the environmental management system. And again, if you recall, what I said is that the environmental management system is a way for senior executives, middle managers, and employees to work together to solve these problems, these potential technical challenges that we have at the laboratory. And that's the way that we begin to integrate across the lab. And then in terms of transparency, we share our information. Our scientists and engineers meet with the local communities, the pueblos, governments, schools, to share information about how we're performing. And then we make the data available through Intellis. And that's a way for us to be, this is our way of being transparent. Now, there are several grand challenges that we want to talk about. And the biggest challenge we have, among many, is to be able to engage the communities in discussion. So our first challenge is to consult with tribal governments and collaborate with our stakeholders to ensure that the potential impact on the environment is as low as reasonably achievable. We call that a LARA, as low as reasonably achievable. Now, in many cases, you might think, well, that sounds like it's a radiation protection concept. Well, it is. But in my world, in public health, it's the principle of do no harm. Intervene early to minimize. If we can intervene early and either eliminate or reduce the potential impact of a problem, reduce the severity. That's as low as reasonably achievable. The next one is to remove or stabilize pollutants from the past. And in that case, what we're doing is we've got regulations such as a consent order we're complying with. But most importantly, one of our major activities is what's known as the 3706 waste campaign. And in that case, we're moving true waste off the hill, moving it to down to Carlsbad for disposal. So that's an example of how we're managing that. The next is to protect our water resources and reduce water use. I mentioned that if we were going to if we were going to bring in a new mission and it was going to require greater water consumption, this goes without saying, we're in an area, part of the country where water is a precious resource. We may make the decision as a laboratory that we're not going to bring that specific mission into the lab because we don't have adequate water resources, or we can't justify the use of those resources to pursue a specific mission activity. That's part of this long-range plan. I will also talk about, when we talk about defenses in depth, how what we're doing to protect surface water and groundwater, in particular the drinking water that's used in Santa Fe. We want to eliminate industrial emissions, discharges, and releases to the environment. As I mentioned at the start of this talk, that was what got my attention as a kid, is living in an area where every day you're reading about where you live is known as Cancer Alley. That just creates a certain degree of paranoia. And so part of what we want to do is that we're going to protect the human health and the environment by reducing, for example, at the laboratory, we're reducing the number of outfalls that we have that could release release water to the environment or any other potential contaminant. Another area is protecting human health and the environment by managing our lands. And I just gave an example of that using these papers. But the other point that I'd like to make is that we have scientists who monitor soil, foodstuffs, and biota to be certain that we're not negatively impacting agricultural resources in the region. And then finally, produce zero radioactive, hazardous, liquid and solid waste. We invest in pollution prevention as a way, pollution prevention research and engineering controls as a way to anticipate and reduce, if not eliminate, any potential pollutants. And then finally, I've talked about using energy wisely and our natural resources wisely. So very quickly, the time frames involved in stewardship, again, is past, present, and future. But the part that I want to focus on is right here on outcomes. The reason why we're doing this work is to is to minimize our environmental impact on the region. So we're looking at environment and potential human health impacts. We want to, so that's from the past. In the present, we want to prevent pollution we want to eliminate outfalls. We want to be in full compliance, and compliance is important because we have a number of permits at the laboratory, and those permits are very specific about performance standards, and we achieve those. And then for the future, we want to make good decisions today so we can create a future, live a sustainable future into the future. So now I'd like to talk about defenses in depth. What a defense in depth simply means is that we're looking at, we have these nested defenses, which are physical barriers that can prevent or limit the movement of contaminants. So by doing so, I mentioned earlier, we're anticipating, recognizing, evaluating, and controlling potential hazards. So we're removing material at the source. This is an example of what we were doing at TA21 when we excavated a material disposal location from the Manhattan Project. Secondly, we stabilize or remove sediments through these nested defenses here's an example of a sediment retention pond. And then thirdly, we measure for known and unexpected contaminants, and the example we're using here is for groundwater monitoring in Mortendad Canyon. I'd like to just spend a moment to talk about defenses in depth. If you look at, here's the Jemez Mountains, you follow the water course down to the Rio Grande as measured here. This is an example of where you can see that we have nested defenses at the top of the canyon to slow the water down. We have monitoring wells. We'll have an asphalt water course to redirect the water to prevent erosion. In some cases, we're doing some excavation. In other cases, we've planted trees in order to absorb contaminants. And then we have other means of directing the water flow as well as monitoring potential contaminants that might be passing through the laboratory property. So we're telling you we're doing these things, but we've got to demonstrate what we're doing. So we have an environmental sampling board consisting of laboratory scientists, and their job is to ensure that we're collecting relevant data to help us understand whether or not we're negatively impacting the environment. And very simply, we collect stormwater, foodstuffs and biota, soils, clean air, and groundwater. We do this to demonstrate compliance with regulations. We do it to determine whether or not there are any adverse trends. With our groundwater monitoring, we have action levels that will trigger a response if we start to approach or exceed a specific trigger level. So this is a way for us to demonstrate our stewardship and our commitment to understanding the unseen aspect of environmental stewardship, which is what is happening, how would a potential contaminant, if it enters the ecosystem, how does that move through the environment? So here's an example of how we're conserving water at the laboratory. So I just take you through this. This is, so how many times do we reuse water? So the first use, we have municipal water used in our kitchens or labs or bathrooms, and it's treated as sanitary waste. And we pump this to a facility that is known as the SURF, and the SURF is the Sanitary Effluent Reclamation Facility. And what we do is we reclaim the water, and we take that potential wastewater, and we use that to cool our computers, our supercomputers. And we use it once in the kitchens and the bathrooms, and then we use it 4 times. So we can cycle the same water 4 times through the laboratory cooling towers to cool the supercomputers. And then here's an example. That's just an example of what the supercomputers would look like. And then we use it twice, 2 additional uses. We release it to maintain Sandia Canyon to maintain healthy wetlands. And so the wetlands upstream will help stabilize any potential contaminants that we have upstream in our canyons. Now, with respect to making stewardship integrated, all this slide is intended to integrate. The point behind this slide is that we take legacy concerns with our current operations, our plans for future stewardship, and we integrate that with our laboratory site sustainability plan. And an example of the output from this site sustainability plan is the water reuse. We invested our dollars in the SURF plan as a way to reuse water. This just demonstrates the various relationships to make that happen. Now, in terms of public involvement, we know the public's interested, as we all are, in clean water, air, and recreational uses for our resources. We focus on presenting the facts as we have them. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Could you go back to
the
previous slide?
Let's make sure I can do that. Yes.
You really have a big picture that you're talking about.
Yes.
And I'm hearing a lot of management speak, but I'm getting lost in some of the tactics.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of wondering, in terms of staff or budget, do you divide up your efforts in terms of past, present, and future?
Sure.
And if so, what's the quantitative division of budget?
Okay, so I'll just, the question has to do with less management speak. I apologize for that.
No, I mean, it's big picture.
Sure. So what I'll do is I'll try to give you some relative scale. So, and actually that's a very good question, because the legacy component, Jeff Mousseau, the Associate Director for Environmental Programs, the past is dealt with respect to our D&D projects and our waste management efforts and compliance with the consent order. That's Jeff Mousseau's Environmental Protection Program world. That's a separate entity, a separate director within the laboratory. They operate somewhere, the scale is somewhere around a $200+ million budget for site cleanup and restoration activities.
And I think that's the number we're always working with, the low 200 million.
Right. Now that's the environmental cleanup and restoration and decommissioning and decontamination. Okay. So it's like TA21, it's Area G, and those sorts of activities. Current operations controlling the present, permit compliance standards, and pollution prevention, that's my world. That's the day-to-day operation. So to frame it, my site support budget is somewhere around $150 million. I have, if I take all the different types of laboratory employees, contractors, and contractors together, we have somewhere more than 600 people actively working in environmental health and safety protection each and every day. Our focus is not just on today, but anticipating. Again, the anticipation piece of the work is very important. Now, future stewardship. This is where Jeff's organization and my organization cross, is that we're both working toward future stewardship, because what Jeff is doing today to move waste off the hill, to help D&D or perform environmental restoration activities, that's helping to create that livable future. What we do every day in my organization, not just to comply, but to be certain that we're implementing pollution prevention programs, such as substituting a non-hazardous material for a hazardous material, that's helping to contribute to the future. So the way that I would look at this then is about $200 million, Jeff Mousseau's Directorate for Environmental Protection. And I don't know how many people Jeff has in his organization, but it's several hundred people. Then my organization, with about $150 million, somewhere north of 600 people working on daily operations. And to give you some scale, my organization consists of anthropologists and archaeologists and wildlife biologists. We manage the hazardous waste program for the laboratory, so the daily movement and shipments of hazardous waste, industrial hygiene and safety, occupational medicine, environmental protection, radiation protection, wellness, and I'm sure I've forgotten something else. So my scope is very broad, but all of that contributes to controlling the present, and then the combination of these two help contribute to the future, which, and our goal is, as we've stated, is live that sustainable future. So if you're going to live it, you've got to create it. So what we're doing today to clean up the past and control the present is going to help create that future. Did that help?
Yeah,
So
great.
here and then here.
Got another question here.
Okay.
Okay. Recently, there was an article in the paper where a peanut company down around Portales, they found some salmonella or stuff in it.
Mhm.
So why is it that when that happens, and last year it was melons, and then it was spinach, and then it was ground meat, and every year there's always something, but immediately the feds get to it, they shut it down, clean it up, and make us assured that you can eat melons, you can eat peanut butter. Now even I know the difference between peanut butter and radionuclides.
Mhm.
So why is it that, and I'm glad you mentioned the Manhattan Project, why is it that with all this wonderful stuff that you're telling us, why has it taken so long? Why is there not a sense of urgency with the lab, like there is with a peanut farmer or a peanut company that is poisoning the people with salmonella? Because number 2 there, it says chromium in the groundwater.
Mhm.
Well, again, I don't know much. Dr. Villarreal could probably address that better than I could, but I would say that drinking chromium is probably just as bad for you as eating peanut butter that's got salmonella in it. Yet there's no urgency at the lab, and that's what I see. The second question is, and I know even when they reneged on the consent order, Mr. Rahel said it was budget. So I know that you're going to tell me budget. But when I worked at the lab, towards the end of the fiscal year, money left available, they wouldn't turn it back in, they would spend it. We would get new vehicles, we would get new computers. Every October we got new computers because of then there were many projects that were started at the lab that never got finished. They used to have on Thursday noon at the salvage yard. They had a rope and hundreds of people would gather behind that rope because of the good deals. At noon, they would put the rope down, everybody would rush in there and buy the stuff. There were electronic components that had never been used, they were still in the envelope. And many other things. Electronic computer components for 35 cents a pound, which you know dang well they cost thousands of dollars. So what I'm saying is there's so much waste on the Hill and so much misuse of money, like buying computers for everybody. And then you say there's no budget. Well, is it possible to corral all these things and save the money and put it into environment and get the place cleaned up once and for all? We talk about what a good job we did at TA21, which I'm very familiar with. But heck, it took ERA funds. Some of the counties in the state received no ERA funds at all. Yet Los Alamos, with the deep pockets that the government has, they got $270 million, which I thought was very unfair. Yeah, I was glad to see TA21 get cleaned up, but not at the expense of ERA funds. They could have gone to Harding County or Grant County or those counties that are really, really hurting, which was supposed to be the purpose of ERA funds, is to help the economy in some of these outlying districts. So the final question is And I've been toying with the idea of asking the lab, why don't you do away with a lot of jobs, a lot of projects that don't really mean much to the average citizen, and put that money into environmental concerns?
Okay, so let me see if I can frame this. You've talked about from food safety issues to the economic issues related to the laboratory waste and that sort of thing. So let's just talk about food safety first. Frankly, I'm glad that we should all be, that the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, would intervene very quickly to address an emergent outbreak of a disease. That's essential. That's part of what we expect our federal government to do. I think it was Listeria was the bacteria that was associated with the melons. We've had problems with ground meat. We've had problems recently with the salmonella. Quite often, what we find out is with melons, it's sanitation practices in the field that can contribute to that. And I'm not as intimately familiar with the salmonella outbreak with the peanut company.
Also.
Excuse me?
E. coli.
E. coli. Yeah, E. coli is typically associated with ground beef, and that's associated with the way that the beef is processed. As a member of the public, as you are, I'm thrilled that the CDC intervenes very quickly. They send out their epidemiologists. They begin tracing the various cases to determine the source and then be able to protect the public. And so that's a good thing. Your next comment, a series of comments, I want to be certain that I address these. Within any large organization, budget issues, money, the best way to describe this is that you have certain dollars that come in. The dollars are allocated to your organization. And so I want to talk with you. I can't comment about the past, but I want to talk to you about what I expect in my organization, because I have control of a tremendous amount of money. I'm a taxpayer like you are, and as a matter of fact, my doctoral work was looking at the true cost of environmental safety and health services at the laboratory. So I studied, my degree is my doctorate's in environmental and occupational health or public health, but I did my dissertation project, your research project, was in economics, because I wanted to understand some of the questions you're asking about. Where does the money go? How does that money link to positive outcomes? So the expectation I have with the 5 or 6 division leaders that work for me is that we are outcome focused. The dollars that we're entrusted with are intended to produce a productive outcome. And so when where's Pete's not here, but every month we report to DOE how we're doing against what we stated we're going to do. And we have an annual work plan, and we tell them how we're doing and how we're progressing. And sometimes I get this kind of feedback from some of my division leaders. It's not happening as often, but we still occasionally get this. I'm thinking about putting together a committee to have a meeting to create a plan to do something. Well, that's not acceptable to me. If we're going to spend $1, I want to understand how that outcome is going to help us achieve what our basic mission is. And the mission of my organization is to anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control potential occupational health and safety hazards, potential public health hazards, and how we're going to protect the environment. So I can't tell you about the past, but I can tell you what I do. So I focus on continuous improvement every day. I have one Six Sigma black belt expert assigned to my organization to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to drive continuous improvement. We also have what's known as yellow belts. Yellow belts are not trained in as much detail as a black belt is, but what we do is I've asked my staff, they've got to manage as a process. You start with the requirements. Why are you doing the work? To your point. So why are you doing that? So we define why we're doing the work. I want the work logically organized to produce a positive outcome. And the only way we can save money and drive waste out of the system, which is another one of your concerns, is why do you guys waste so much money, is to think about how that work is being done, so then we can improve over time. So I can assure you that what we're doing in my organization is to operate as efficiently and as effectively as we can. And I want you to know that last year we made changes in my organization, and we had to reduce the number of staff by more than 100. We're improving our performance, and we took $10 million out of my budget, which may not seem like a lot, but it's a lot. People were doing real work, but we're becoming more efficient, and so we give that money back to the laboratory to reinvest in other work activities. So you asked about a lot of things. You know, I've been at the lab for a very long time now. I don't want to say how long. It's more than 25 years. I've never been to this. I've heard these stories about the salvage yard, and you know, one of these days I'm going to make a point of going, because I've always wondered about. I've heard these. The only person I knew who knew the most about the salvage yard was Ed Grothus and the black hole. You remember the black hole? Well, I've been in the black hole lots of times, and now it's being basically decommissioned. But Ed was one of those guys who somehow, I don't know if he ever turned the black hole into black gold, but he had more things from the laboratory in the black hole, and I suspect he knew the details of how the salvage yard worked. I've never been to the salvage yard, but my intent is to be a good husband our resources wisely, because I'm not getting any more money. Every year I'm being asked to do more with less. And when my director hired me, he said, your challenge is to improve performance with fewer resources, and that gets to your point. Really what he was telling me was, I want you to do your job, do it well, but efficiently and effectively with the dollars you have available. So Charlie has encouraged me to do that, and I'm telling you that, I'm here to tell you today, that's exactly what I'm doing. Because I don't want us wasting time. I don't want us wasting our resources. And I've got professionals that I want us to focus on good outcomes. We have people that do maintenance on roofs. I want you to focus on fall protection and make sure that the maintenance workers, because I was one once when I was in college, they're not falling off the roof. So we've got more important problems, and we're going to pay attention to those. To go back to your very first comment, food safety is a big challenge in this country. Environmental protection and health and safety is a big challenge at the laboratory. And I'm proud that I'm able to work at the lab, because I've got the support I need from my boss, Charlie McMillan, to do the right things. As a matter of fact, I'll say it anyway, I can almost get too much help in trying to do my job. I know how to do my job. You worked at the lab. You remember what that's like? You get too much help to do your job? I get too much help sometimes. But our goal is not to hurt anybody and do as best we can. Yes?
You mentioned a while back that trees had been planted in some areas to absorb contaminants. Mm-hmm. A three-part question. What species of trees or plants were planted? Are they periodically harvested to perhaps capture those contaminants? And if they're not harvested, what herbivores may be feeding, browsing on that plant material, and thereby perpetuating the pollutants within the environment?
So Lori is sitting in the back telling me that I've misspoken. So Lori, tell me where I made the error. She's going to tell you what I meant to say.
What he meant to say was we planted over 10,000 willows to knock down the speed of the sediments so that the sediments stay on site.
Well, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's the reason why I'm not allowed to come to these things by myself.
But wasn't there some national coverage on the experiment being done? The guy planting the trees in saran wrap containers and pumping hot air in there to see how they respond?
Yeah.
There was something in the New York Times about that.
Yeah. John, do you know anything about that?
Yeah,
was that CO?
That's the study that Mike talked about with tree mortality and
Yep.
increasing temperature, looking at climate change effects to the forests in the Southwest.
Right.
So he was looking at how the trees
Yeah, that
respond
was,
to this changing climate, heating it up and seeing how they respond in the future. And the results of his study and his projections are that the forests are going to, in the Southwest are going to recede up elevation. I mean, they're in the process of sort of moving from the lower elevations, seeking similar habitat now, which is higher up in the elevation because the temperature is right. So that was that study. Was the guy who was
Who was that?
Nate McMillan.
Yeah.
And he's the one that's done that tree scheme.
so I apologize for misspeaking. Thank you, Laurie. Yes.
You spoke earlier of spending dollars and getting the biggest bang for the buck. When budget cuts come along, how does the environmental side fare against maybe computing or the weapons side? Does your division or directorate get cut more than the other two maybe?
So, no, not necessarily. Try to simplify this, the way the laboratory is structured. I was basically given a target, and then it's my job to work with my division leaders, and I have 6 division leaders, and we work together to make decisions, and these are risk-based decisions. So what we have to do is we prioritize our work. We then we say, okay, we're going to take 5% out of the budget. So we'll run through an exercise. We'll take 5% of the budget, and then we start allocating it. And then we reach a point where we draw a line, we're out of money, and anything below the line then presumably is not funded. Well, that doesn't always, it's great in theory, but it doesn't always work. So then we make a manual correction. We look at the areas, and in some cases we have to move something up. But at some point, it's one of the, and it's a difficult task, is that people are doing work every day, and we're working to make things better for environment, safety, and health. And sometimes we have to make some difficult decisions. But we're very certain that we don't place we make decisions that don't affect human health and environment, place our workers at risk, and we minimize risk. Sometimes we do some of our activities may be nice to do, but not absolutely essential. And so we look at cutting in those areas. And so the support organizations, which I'm a support organization, is funded differently than the programmatic line organizations because they receive their funding from the federal government for a specific scope of work. That they've agreed to do some work for the federal government for a certain amount of money, and so that's effectively a contract. But where there's any variable costs within the laboratory, every organization has that. So we, perhaps we do with, fewer other overhead support within our organizations. We try. That's the reason why we focus on continuous improvement, and so this will be. I hate to use this management speak, but I'm at a loss for how to describe this otherwise. My goal with my organization is we need to identify and remove non-value-added work. What non-value-added work to me is, if we stop doing that, does anyone notice? If they don't notice, that's non-value-added work. I mean, it's oversimplified, but that's the way that I try to manage it. But as budgets become constrained, I'll tell you, it becomes a challenge. Okay. Other questions? All right, I think I just have a couple more, and then I'm finished here. So we've talked about public involvement. We've already talked about Intellis. And then I want to thank Lori, who's done such a wonderful job and her team have done a wonderful job with these slides. Basically, this information is on the web, and I just want to point a few things out. And if you go to this website, this was very interesting. You can take a Google Earth tour of the laboratory. You see a GIS map, and then you can click on that, and it pulls up different fields of information. And I encourage you to take a look at that. But our overall goal is, this is another way that we want to communicate. I mean, granted, we're in an electronic world these days, in the internet. go explore on this site. I think what you'll see is that we are committed to sharing information with the public, and then you can contact us, and we want your feedback. It's this strategy is dynamic to the extent that we've defined it. We're making it. We're beginning to operate with this strategy within the laboratory, and it is our intent to integrate between Jeff's organization, my organization, the programmatic science organizations, to make good decisions about long-range planning for new facilities and infrastructure at the laboratory, new missions, and being able to be good stewards of our limited resources, such as water. And water is very important, and energy. So with that, any other final questions? I probably have gone a little bit too long, but these were, I appreciate your questions. Quite often they're very challenging. I appreciate those. Any other final questions? Yes.
Earlier in the meeting, somebody brought up a question related to the possibility of a catastrophic release in the event of an earthquake, and where on all of this would that sort of thing fit in?
Well, a catastrophic release related to, I assume...
Something that had been brought up by the Nuclear Facilities Safety Board.
Okay, the DNFSB. Well, that would be taken into account as part of our overall scenario planning for protecting the public. I have to admit, I'm not the expert on what we're doing with respect to the DNFSB recommendations, but I do know that we have hardened the facility with the structural. With the recommendations for making structural changes in PF4, but I'm really not qualified to answer that kind of question in detail. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.